Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who has withdrawn from society and taken his workshop with him.
Tim Longo. Wow, is that a thing that can happen?
That is a thing that can happen. I had a dwarf who became a master, I think it was a master stonemason, who decided he was going to withdraw from society, hole himself up in the workshop to make it unavailable to others, and then made a magnificent, I think it was basically a musical instrument. At the time, I was like, I don't know what a rem is or whatever the word was. It was like rec or lek or lem or some imaginary fantasy word that didn't mean anything to me. But I think later I saw it in some other menu, and I think maybe it was a musical instrument. Anyway. And when he finished, he was like, he returned to society, but he had this magnificent thing that he had made, and it was now going to be an heirloom for his family.
Wow. That's amazing. Because generations are like a thing, right?
Yes, but I mean, I haven't had that. I haven't had
anything
generationally happen yet, but I think it's possible.
Yeah, because I just have seen references to it at places here and there. So I assume, like, if you really, game's been going for 16 years. So
yeah,
at the very least, you should be able to keep it going for multiple. Yeah, that's crazy.
Mm-hmm. I was very surprised when that happened. I also had a second ghost in that same place. I feel very bad about the ghosts because they're an indication of failure. I have failed those dwarves, and their ghosts are haunting me. And I do hope that they have some sort of, as someone put it last week, a spiritual awakening, and they want to help me out or change things. But I have not gotten to the point where anything like that has happened. I have not even tried clicking on them, actually. Now that I think about it, I probably should have. I bet you can.
Reincarnation or something.
I'm always so focused on the things I want to do that I'm not really like, oh, well, there's a thing I can't control. Oh, well, can't have a ghost do anything. So I'm just going to ignore them. They're going to wander around. I haven't found somebody to exorcise them or anything like that, or haven't really worked out what to do about burial. There's a lot of systems I have not really scratched the surface on yet. I now have had 3 separate dwarven fortresses built, and I have to say I really enjoy the early part of the game because each time the environment plus things you've learned, plus the assortment of dwarves you have and sort of like, what resources you start out with really inform like what you're going to try to do. Mm-hmm. and it has felt like each one of them have been different. And my second one, and these are all still active. Like I can go back to any one of them. I have 1 on my laptop and 2 on my desktop. And it's like the second one, I had an aquifer, which means, they would get to a certain point digging and go, oh no, the wall's damp, which is different from the past where it'd be just like, oh, the wall's damp, I'll dig through it anyway. Oh no, a river, we're all dead. Now they get it and they put their hand on the wall and they're like, oh, that's damp, can't do anything there. And I looked up, I think I read it in the in-game, how to deal with that, how to deal with aquifers or, water and things like that. And I was actually trying to work towards building a well because I actually dug out a lot of the damp area and I saw that the water was starting to pool. And it's really funny. You can actually watch as because you can turn on somewhere in the interface, you can turn on what the
numbers.
The numbers for the depth of the water or for lava, I guess. And so I had done that at some point, and you can actually see the water like you can see it in Minecraft or whatever. You can see the water go to a 2 and 1 the square and then spread out around all the other squares around it, and they all kind of settle again. A spot will get wet and then dry up, so they're simulating, I don't know, evaporation or absorption or something. I don't know what's going on there. I was going to try to make a well, but I haven't figured out how to do that yet. So
I finally made one, but
did you?
in a super weird place. But yeah, I had a similar thing happen. I kind of intentionally, I dug through knowing that there was water there because I I don't know what I was thinking. I was thinking that maybe there'd be some way to control it, but it just was a complete mess. Just sort of, and it just happened to be like right near one of my stockpiles that was marked as all. So there was a bunch of different things in the stockpile. And yeah, I mean, seeing them basically model out the water flow was super. And then also, I think it impacted because this was like a pool on the surface layer, and then the pool went down into the layer below ground, and that's what and then below ground is where I broke through, and then I went up to the top, and it actually was modeled. You know, the pool of water was going, up on the top was lower, and which actually, oh shoot, you know what? Now that I think about it, that's what enabled me to make the well. Because it basically made a slope.
Lowered the water level.
It lowered the water level and made a slope around the edge of the pool up on the top. And so I put the well on that slope basically. So I guess it considered it to be below, like the water level was below the well, even though it was kind of like the well is kind of almost it looks like it's in the pool, but it's on the edge of the pool. So but it counted. And so I finally made one. Luckily, because my previous civilization, another good sign of failure when you have a stockpile full of corpses of dwarves,
oh, God.
and people just keep, and it basically was a mass extinction because of dehydration. Like they just I hadn't gotten booze going yet or whatever, and I was just kept trying to figure out the well thing, and then. At the end of all of this, once I figured out my second game, or no, this was the third game when I got the well finally built and everything was fine, and actually things were going quite well at that point, no pun intended. Then I found out that one of the zones you can designate is water collection.
Oh, okay. I should try
which I could have done the whole time. Like when they were all dehydrated, I could have just gone up top and said, "Go get water from this river, idiots!" It's like it's going to be fine. But of course, I guess you have to zone that for them to do it.
I wonder if you can zone. Well, you can zone outside for sure because I usually put a refuse. All my stockpiles now are custom, whenever I make them, I'm like, okay. And it might be basically everything but refuse. Like, it's like I go and I collect all, and then I click refuse and say, none of these and no corpses. So those all, get put outside always, is the hope anyway. I'm constantly learning things and that's actually, I think, why I have tended to, I kind of get bogged down after a while where I'm like, there's a lot, it gets, and this is why I don't like these games anymore. It's like, it's too much time just kind of in the morass of like, not a lot new is happening. I'm not learning things at quite the same rate. My plans take much, much longer to come to fruition. I get dumped, like a couple dozen dwarves at a time. I was like, okay, I have no rooms for any of those people, and I'm just like, oh, now I'm just, all the other things I wanted to do, I have to wait, until these other things happen. I have to try to build up my stores, but the things that I learn every time, and that's why I keep starting new ones, are really always interesting to me. Like, oh, okay, I have a totally different approach to farming now. I used to make one big plot, and then, but now I'll like subsection it into like several 3x3 plots, so I can plant all the different types of things at once, because I never have tons of one type of seed that I could do one big plot with. So I'm always doing these things, and that means I could also more easily rotate crops, eventually, if I ever got to that point, and even leave some things fallow deliberately. And so I've kind of like, every time I've done it, I learned that you can actually use sand to plant in. Didn't realize that. I was like, got to the point where winter was coming. I'm like, I still haven't found any place to plant. I've got chalk floor and I've got sand. Oh, sand. maybe. And then I was like, oh, yep, could have put. And that was like that game. I'm like, man, this game was going so well. Now I'm not sure they're not going to all murder each other. It was one where he wasn't getting a lot of migrants. I'm like, I know this is because I don't have any food production. and I didn't know what to do about it, and I finally worked that out. I was like, oh, of course, that was the one with the aquifer. It's still going. It's still maybe salvageable, but it felt like I was in a rough spot. Never did convince that what the Discord is calling the Very Pouty Bard.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I wanted to check in on that. Never figured it out.
Have not managed to make her happy. I have some more thoughts, but I have not gone back to the bribery on that. I played another 10 or so hours this past week, but nice. There was a lot split into those two other games, so I probably spent 2 hours trying to up the fate of the Very Pouty Bard, but that was also interrupted by more migrants and having to dig out rooms for them, and everybody's got problems, man. Everybody's got problems. They all have things that they want, and it's like, how am I gonna?
It's really it's fascinating because it's really true. I mean, I guess we just haven't. Well, you've gotten to some of the battle stuff a little bit more than I have. Well, more than I have for sure, but you've gotten to a little bit. But when I think about sort of the core loops of something like Civ or Populous, or I mean, obviously not SimCity, but some of those other ones that are a little bit more analogous to this. Mm-hmm. One of the key driving factors with expansion is conflict, right? Because you see there's or diplomacy, I guess, if you're playing different ways in Civ. But it's like there's always that sort of looming tension of another faction that's going to come in, and you're going to clash at some point. And I know that's the case here eventually, but I haven't gotten to it yet. But I'm just surprised because in Civ it's like you're starting from nothing and going and only expanding in a way. But this concept of migrants coming in, to your point, this concept of happiness, which we know Sims and plenty of other games do, those are the real threat in my mind, right? Those are the real tension builders. It's not like an enemy dwarven group or whatever. It will be eventually, I'm sure, because you'll be attacked when you become too powerful. But I think we talked about this last time, but it's just so funny how, because you said it multiple times of like, oh, here come some migrants, and I guess in some ways we have to be careful with the commentary around that, but which is whole nother topic maybe, anyway, the fact that is a statement where you think to yourself, okay, I now have to change what I'm doing because there's people who are excited enough to come to my fortress, right? But it's this tension of like I'm glad they're here, but I'm also like it's work, for me.
Yeah, and I think part of my there's also, I think I have a problem where I have a tendency to want to expand like down into lower levels really, really fast, and like because I'm looking for cool whatever gems and stones and things like that, and I feel like that is me as a person not knowing much about this game trying to find all the things in it, right? And I think it's not built to that that kind of speed, so I shouldn't be spending time on that. I think often I should be spending time on like, okay, I'm probably going to have some migrants, things are going well, I should have the rooms ready before they get here.
I started doing that.
Or I should have a dormitory ready for them before they get here. So when they come, I just assign them all to the dormitory, and then I build their rooms, or whatever the approach is. I haven't really figured out rather what the sort of burrows are supposed to be about, or barrows maybe. I don't know what that's all about. There's been a lot of things like that where I'm like, I don't really understand.
I realize those are surface dwellings that are like
I don't know. I didn't really get a good sense of what that was supposed to be. It was sort of like, it seemed like it was supposed to be like designate this whole section to be basically one thing, that people are assigned to.
Like a community, like a village or something.
Right, exactly. Was the sort of sense the way they talked about it, but I'm like, I don't know if I'm ever going to get. I think it was to make it like more, internally manageable and not sort of, micromanaging. Was the sense I got from the way it's talked about. But there's just so much that it's hard to know because I don't have the experience of playing it with whatever, 25 or 30 hours under my belt at this point. I don't have nearly the depth of knowledge about it just from play. Like I think at a certain point I could go read and get strategies and do all of those things and kind of learn from what other people know. But if I'm trying to take it in just by myself with fairly few, I mean, a couple times I've looked things up just to I don't even understand what I'm supposed to do with this thing kind of questions. But for the most part, I just kind of go and, try a thing and then it doesn't seem to do anything. So I'm like, okay, well, what am I missing? I did that with the mine carts. That's a way more complicated system than I realized. You have to set up endpoints, and each endpoint has to be associated with a stockpile. And then there are rules that you set up, like go here to there, and then do this and take on this and put in that. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm just not, I'm not getting at all, just not even remotely.
Pile upon pile upon
pile. Just
stuff. Exactly. Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, as a segue from that, one topic that I wanted to throw out there, which I wanted to ask about. I didn't go too deeply into it, but I started really trying to scrutinize the different windows that they have in the lower left, the different report screens or what have you. And they have the justice menu, they have the objects menu, the administration stuff. I'm forgetting some. There's
it's
population one, of course.
Nobles and administration, I think.
Yeah, but it's just and I just it's a little bit like SimCity, I think, in that regard, and maybe in the advisors in Civ, but you just open those up, and then each one has its own series of tabs, right?
Yeah,
and if you look at, for instance, the admin one, right, which I thought was just. Or the objects one's a pretty obvious one because it's it's categorized, but then it's how do you filter them? And then each object has its own thing, and it's just so freaking deep. And then the admin one was hilarious because I think that's the one where, if you want to find a broker, you want to assign somebody to be a broker.
Yes.
And it has your list of everybody, and you look in there, and it shows qualifications.
Yeah, their relevant experience. Yeah.
Their relevant experience. And for broker, it's an adequate liar.
Yep.
And comedian.
Yep.
It's and those are there's the people who have no qualified skills, and so they're just listed there. But then the people who have some, they list things like that, right? Where it's broker. Yeah, I guess a broker would need to be a little bit humorous, to keep people. Yeah, keep the levity, right? And then of course they're going to be a little bit of a liar because they got to be a salesperson.
Yeah, you want to buff up that resume? Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So it's just and it's such a. I mean, it'll come in takeaways, but it's such a product of 16 years of development.
Yeah.
Where it's just okay, we're just going to add this another layer, and then this another layer, and then another layer. Oh, the missions. I found the missions too. Did you find those?
I did not.
Oh my God. Okay. So I fooled around with the different world creation tools. I made a pocket world, which just is an aside. It doesn't have anything to do with the missions, but I just thought that was. Did you ever make a pocket?
No. I've made only large ones.
So. It is hilarious. It's this tiny, tiny little world, and you can see everything on one little map, and it's I don't know. I just thought it was
this
adorable.
This is the whole world.
This is the whole world, yeah. And it's a number of, you can count the number of macro tiles on your fingers and toes. But anyway, that was super interesting in that process. But if you go to the reason I found this is I made the pocket world and I wanted to look at the map, the full world map. And I think it's on the complete lower right. There's a button that you can just look at the full map, the world map.
Mm-hmm.
You click on that, but then there's these new buttons that are called mission buttons, and you can create missions for your dwarves to go on. And the examples they gave are looking for artifacts or rescuing somebody who was captured.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And so we were talking about the other day of how the trade depot becomes a bit of a quest mechanic in a way.
Right.
Because it gives you a goal. But apparently you can make your own goals where you're just like,
so I'm
here's
gonna
your
do
mission.
this.
Yeah, it's just like, but I don't, it's just like, it's not to say that I mean, feature creep is unfair, but it's like these appendages after appendages have been added, for good reason. And I can completely see the motivation for where this stuff comes from because it's iterative development, and they're probably working with their community of fans, and they're like, wouldn't it be cool if we had missions or whatever? And then they just add it, or they themselves come up with this stuff. But I just have never seen. I mean, I guess an MMO is the closest thing that I could say. Kind of is has similarities, like WoW as an example, having played that for so long. You can see the layers upon layers. But the interesting thing about that, as a counterpoint to my own point, is that I feel like when each new expansion of an MMO comes out, in WoW's case, they will reinvent things and kind of scrap entire systems and take them out. But in this case, I think it's more of like adding. It's all additive,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I think, or it's part, at least part of the story. I think they do a fair amount of refinement as well, because I think that things like, I haven't had a flood. I haven't had it happen where like I had no warning and the place was flooded, and the ceiling caved in, right, and things like that. Things that felt like sudden death, you couldn't do anything about it kind of problems. Yeah. Now, there might have been things I could have done about it, but it was too opaque and maybe it felt unfair. I think we said in the first
that's a good point.
discussion that this was a bit easier. It just felt a little gentler, and and even just of the last version that was the last free version, feels that way as well, which I think is basically the same. Like, I can't imagine that they're that different. So yeah, I definitely feel like some of those things have been refined away from that like huge sudden loss of like, oh man, I just lost 2/7 of my starting party and they were the ones who were doing all the mining. Now what do I do? And the unhappiness scale is so, I don't know there may be 9 levels of happiness or something, 7 or 9, something like that. I guess 7. And it just feels so, it's,
opaque.
It's opaque. I mean, they tell you what their unmet needs are, but the like getting to satisfy those needs is the part where I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, they have an unmet need of praying to such and such god. Well, I built a temple. Like, I put a statue in there. I put a chest in there. Like it said, temples need chests so they can put whatever in there. I don't remember what they wanted, musical instruments, and so I always put some chests in there and make some musical instruments, and like trying to get that place really happy and make everybody want to go there, and nope. So it's like, I'm definitely, I feel like I'm missing something in that critical core system that I don't understand what to do to make survivability higher. But maybe that's not like, because losing is fun, I guess, is one of the things that they say. Maybe they don't want that, right? I mean, maybe that's not one of their goals. Maybe they want to make it still just fun to watch. I mean, it's like like I've said with a game like Spelunky, like I don't mind losing in Spelunky, particularly if it's something I haven't seen happen to me before, or is a particularly excruciating clockwork of like, oh, I got hit by the arrow that cast me across the room that hit me into a bat, and when I stood up, the bat bounced me, and that bounced me over a ledge and into some spikes, and it's just like, what? I never had a chance. I don't know what happened there, and just a bunch of things happened, and I ended up, on spikes or in lava or whatever, getting thrown by a Yeti off into the infinite abyss. And it's always just dumb things that I die to in Spelunky, where I'm like, oh, never seen that before. And I think that there's a certain amount of that, ethos here as well. And because the game is so large, there's just going to be so many ways to fail that, learning enough about all of those to avoid all those different sorts of failure is a long, long process. It feels like, because there's so many ways that things can go wrong. And so many things to learn about optimizing your space. I mean, one of the things I've read is like, make the bedrooms 3x2 or something like that. And I'm like, well, that doesn't feel very kind. Like, I want them to have a good size bedroom.
Yeah, me too.
So I always make them like 4x4, which is, apparently, I don't know, 60% or something more than they need or whatever. And so, I feel like, oh, well, I could cut corners that way. But I don't like doing it. So I haven't done it. It's actually, more than that, more than they need. So yeah, I don't know. There's just a lot of weird things I'm still figuring out.
Like what did we say? It came up with Dark Souls. What was the
knowledge? Knowledge is the real reward or something like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, whatever. I don't remember what. I don't know if I said it the first time or not, and I always butcher it every time. But yeah, it's like yeah, I guess it was about failure, and it's funny that we had played Dark Souls not that long ago, and that's such failure-based loops. And this is so different, as you couldn't get further from the game genre-wise, but it's still, that sense of failure is still like learning. Yeah, because it is. I mean, it fits in the sim. It fits in the sim bucket because I guess I'm listening to you talk about sort of like how you hit those walls and you're kind of like the daunting nature of why you don't play these games anymore and those sorts of things. And I can definitely relate because I feel it too. And I can hear it in your voice in that you're like, I know what I'm in for. Like, I don't, at least I'll say that for myself, but it's like,
no, I do.
I can see the future. Right.
Yeah.
And I know I can do it. I know I have it in me because I've done it before. But I know what this looks like. Yeah. I know that it's hundreds of hours.
Yeah.
It's like every fortress that we make is going to get a little bit further and then catastrophe, and then a little bit further and then catastrophe. So it's like this, you know, that journey while it's like, you know what? Everything is like fighting Artorias. It all comes back to fighting Artorias with a bandit's blade. It's like, I know what I'm in for. I know what's going to happen here. I just need to put in the time and learn and execute. And it's like building this fortress is like, fighting a boss. It's like, okay, the boss is the world or whatever.
Right.
The boss is
the rule set, but the rule set is so huge, whereas with something more immediate, I think it's the time to failure is so long, that, it's
the investment
2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours where I'm, before I'm like, oh, I see where this is going now. Like I'm not going to come back from this. And then you're like, we're just going to watch. Do I just watch it fail now for the next 3 hours? How long is it going to take? Right. I mean, I've had one murderous dwarf go through and kill a bunch of people and, somebody get possessed and all of that stuff in one. I was like, it's kind of funny because, it sort of reminds me of, what is it? Tolstoy, every happy family is the same and every unhappy family is, unhappy in its own way. And it's like every fortress is, that fails in its own way, and you feel like I'm just trying to refine to the perfect, like, the ideal of like, this is what you have to do to make it work. These are to balance everything. And if it's like, well, everything has to be 3x2 instead of 4x4, like I make it, like, do I want to live in that world? Like, I don't, and do I want to go through the work to get to that point? I'm all the same, totally admiring everything that they've done and really enjoying my, whatever 30 hours with it. It's also, it's just looking at the mountain and saying, I don't know if I have that in me anymore. As how it fits into my life and the other.
You see the path.
Yeah.
Do you want to climb it? Yeah. I mean, like to play devil's advocate with myself on my previous comments, it's like and to your point on the failure states where you're like, you can see the failure coming. So when I had that flood that I sort of intentionally did to see what would happen, and then I was like, okay, well, this game's over. But I was able to build a wall and block it, and then through the evaporation modeling or whatever the hell, it's like, luckily, I wonder if this is, ooh, wow. I just thought of something. I wonder if I actually was able to recover from it because this current one I'm playing, the geological material is largely sand. And so I'm wondering if
absorbed.
the water absorbed and went down. In fact, it did. I think there's some water below in the lower. So it actually it absorbed and kind of, went through the filter versus like if it had been hard rock.
Right.
Maybe it never would have evaporated. But anyway, long story short, I was able to recover, and that fortress is still going, even though I had a flood. And I just wanted to see like if it would evaporate or is there anything the dwarves would do? Like, can I go get buckets and like collect it or somehow? And I did make some buckets, but they didn't do anything with it. So maybe I have to do something to get them to do that. But those stories of recovery is my point, where it's like, oh, okay, I thought I was on the way out. And then like making a well, like just making a well is like this glorious moment of like, we're going to survive. We're going to make it.
We're going to do it.
What's the next problem though? Like, oh, I don't have enough of whatever. So yeah, I mean, it's, there's a, flip side of it all as far as like those seeing the failure coming, but then recovering and realizing you actually figured out a way to push it off at least longer, even though failure is always out there someplace. I mean, I feel like the real boss monster is the happiness meter.
Like,
it's like
that's the thing. Yeah,
it's like you're just watching.
It feels like it takes so much to pull people out of it going bad, and I don't know what to do to keep them from getting to that state where it's so bad, right? Where they're just unhappy all the time. Like I've got, the hippest tavern in all of this world. I've got, with tons and tons of bards. I've got like 8 temples or something. I've got, everybody's bedroom has, cut stone walls. Like I went in and did the interior of everybody's rooms with, I don't think I decorated them all, but they're at least all like pointed stone. Like I went and smoothed the stone out so that there are real walls in all the rooms, all the bedrooms anyway, of the original 7. And then I try to get to other ones later, but just inevitably to get them out of that trough that they're in seems basically impossible. Like once they're there, it's, and so what I learn is like, oh, I've learned this thing that I can apply next time, but next time so maybe that next one will go even further, longer before I get to a state where I don't know what to do to make people happy, make dwarves happy. But that'll be even further in, and I'll learn some other lesson that I should have applied 6 hours before, and then have to go even further, and I feel like the guy who's painting the road, and like the first day he paints like, 8 miles, and his boss is like, that's amazing. I've never seen anybody paint so well before the road. And then the next day he does 4 miles, and he's like, wow, that's not as good, but that's still really, really good. I'm sure he's really tired after that first day. And then it's 2 miles, and he's like, wow, that's good. It's still average, and then the next day it's 1 mile. And the boss says to the guy, finally says, well, you're doing so well. You started out, it was 8 miles the first day. And then, the second day was only 4 miles. But now you're down to just like a mile a day. And the guy says, well, I keep getting further away from the can of paint. And I feel like I'm just getting further and further away from the can of paint, with my, where it's like, the distance between new thing I need to learn to apply earlier so that it'll go further is just further and further into the play session, because the game is so big, and that's the daunting aspect of play that I've just, that's what I've kind of reached.
Yeah.
So,
but at the same time, like you said, having a lot of just being impressed with the fact that is even a thing, right?
Oh yeah, it's super compelling. I'm glad this didn't exist when I was in college.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's not the time for us.
Or grad school. Yeah.
Even though I definitely get sucked into games these days, but and um like Valheim or whatever. But this has the potential to do that. And there's that sort of like, I think we have a term for it, but I'm kind of blanking on what it would be. But there's that moment of revelation where you get over that hump, right?
Yeah.
And I felt that way with Dark Souls. Once I was started really just once I was streaming and decided that I was going to try to basically nearly 100% it, or fight every boss and all that stuff. And, there's a point of confidence, right, where you're like, okay, I can do this, right? I know, compared to the first 20 hours where you're like, there's no way I can finish this game.
Exactly.
There's literally, this is impossible. It's not happening. So like, I can imagine, like you said, this is for this game way farther down the road, but can you imagine that moment where you're over the hump and you're like, I can beautiful mind this, right? I get this game, and I can only just imagine how magical the game is at that point, where you're just like, everything, what to do. You just have to execute on it. So I don't think it would be boring for me at that point too. It's like, even though you might have learned most of the game, because I think the game still has enough unexpected things about it where you have to react. Because like the world you built, or what the AI does, or enemies, or what have you,
or just the ongoing challenges that you can make for yourself. I mean, we have emails, from folks saying, well, you should try to do this, and there, somebody's written in about the systems that actually support some of the things we were talking about last time, where I just want a little more UI support. Oh no, there's a dwarf for that, right? If you assign a dwarf to be a manager, you can do more complicated orders, and things like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which I don't know how I feel about, honestly, and we'll talk about it when we actually read those emails. Might be a couple weeks before we get to them. Like, I definitely have I was like, well, you already have this abstraction where I'm giving a bunch of orders to a workshop.
Yeah.
Having to have to then have a different type of dwarf to be able to change the kind of orders I can do there feels a little like the line on the abstraction feels wrong on that. Like, you already kind of said this is a UI thing. Now it's a UI and a dwarf thing. And I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that.
There's not a consistency there.
Yeah, I wouldn't have known to go look for that. I mean, when I read those emails, I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And somebody put it in the Discord as well, I think. And I went, okay, I'm not sure I could have gotten there from here, if, knowing what I know. It's like, well, if you had this dwarf to do this, you could. Like, well, I don't know if that makes sense to me. Just because of the way the game presents, but it's not. I see where they get there for sure. I mean, we have also talked about it's often cool to see mechanics externalized into characters in the world and things like that.
I love that. Yeah, and I love that stuff. And it is an interesting question, and it'd be interesting to know like the decision making between those two directions, right? Of like what stays in UI and what becomes this atomic thing in the game. Yeah. Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Because it is all about dwarves, so it's like anytime you can make it about the dwarves, it seems like you should.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But that initial thing isn't, in a way, right?
No, agreed.
So it's just, or maybe in their thinking it is like, it's like, well, that's the one dwarf that is going to work that workshop. But of course, all the dwarves are kind of fungible in that way, like they can all kind of do multiple jobs. So it doesn't really feel. I don't know. It just feels strange, and that was one where I was like, okay, I can see them making that choice, but it also just felt like the wrong divide for me. But yeah, I mean, it is a sort of game where I do wish I, had more room for it in my life. I think that, one of the things though, is that it is a very intense game to play for me. Like that I'm so focused.
Yeah, it is.
While I'm playing, that it's hard to spend a lot of what would be, leisure time on it, because it wouldn't be very relaxing. I tend to like, if I'm just going to chill out with a game, I tend to like to not stress too much, and not have to super focus. They're definitely, I mean, the Dark Souls of the worlds aside, and sure, I play Spelunky every day, but I also almost never make it to the end of my Spelunky daily run. I often die early, and I'm like, okay, well, I was out of that in 10 minutes. And it's not a big deal. But and that's probably why I'll never get a 3 day in the row turkey from the daily challenge. But this game feels like every minute I'm playing it, I'm sort of in flow, but I don't come out of it feeling refreshed and relaxed. In a way I do with other leisure activities where I might similarly fall into flow. So
yeah, it's very reminiscent of, for me at least, because when we played Civ for the podcast, I got into, was it Civ 5 for a while, the modern version that I think we did a bonus episode for, and then I really got into Civ Beyond Earth, the sci-fi one.
Yeah, we did the Beyond Earth or whatever the sci-fi
yeah, or maybe we did that one as well. Yeah, maybe that was our bonus episode. But anyway, I played it a lot after we finished, and that's just my most recent Civ experience. But Civ does that to me as well. And when I had finished a session recently with Dwarf Fortress, I had that same sort of like weird adrenaline, like coming off of caffeine or something, where but it wasn't the caffeine, it was the game, where I'm just like, you're just so intent and so focused, and you don't want to mess anything up. And then when you stop playing, you realize how intense you were, and then how non-relaxing it was.
I mean, last week after we recorded, I went and played. I started a new game up here on a laptop and was like totally into it. And then afterwards, it took me ages to fall asleep because I was just so keyed up.
Exactly.
And as a person who probably going to play mostly at night, that's not a good thing for me.
Not good for totally. It puts
health.
You in a different state, a completely different mental state, which is also like a testament to it, right?
Absolutely.
You got to be okay.
Yeah, it's totally
you want to want it, but
but
it's oof,
just where it fits for me. Anyway, so I'm thrilled that we played it, and I will probably dabble in it from time to time just to go back to these different halls and try to figure out what I was doing. One thing I would love is, I guess you could keep a notebook or something, but it'd be nice to be able into the game just say, this is what I was trying to do. I often do that when I'm playing games for the cast. I'll just take notes in my normal notes saying, okay, this is what I was going to do next, and if it's going to,
if you come back to it, you mean?
If I come back to it, or even just if I need, from week to week, if I need to explore something like, I have this, mystery I wanted to explore. That happened a lot with Dark Souls or whatever. Just like, I got to remember to go check out this area. I feel like I didn't see everything, or like I saw a path that I didn't go up, and maybe there's something up there, and almost always there is. So same thing here. I feel like I should take some notes and be like, okay, you finally figured out what to do about the farms, small ones, and do it earlier. Maybe take this save back and, do that way instead. Because I've definitely had times where I've like just undone a bunch of work, like tore down some farms to rebuild them to make them a little more manageable and things like that. And I don't know, it's just, there's just a lot of game here.
Well, if you want to put, notes, just, make a book in the game and then put the notes in the book in the game, and then put the book on a shelf someplace.
Put the book on a shelf, and then
you come back, you're just like, go read the book.
Find the shelf. Yeah. I still haven't even built a library. I have a library room that I've built, but I haven't got around to bookshelves for it yet.
Yeah, that's surprising. That seems like it would have been a priority for you, but
I didn't know what it would do for me. It didn't seem like it was going to happen.
What could be the happiness you need?
I don't think so. It doesn't be the happiness I would need, but clearly not them. So, anyway. Well, let's turn then to takeaways. We are at the end of a series. I feel like I was down there at the end, but I'm really not. It's actually just, the mismatch of my life and this game, what this game would require for me is pretty great. To become that good at it, or just to spend the kind of time with it that I think it demands. I totally get why people fall into this and love it, and like I do too. Honestly, I could see myself falling down that hole for a long time. So let's talk takeaways. Our end of the road discussion of like what we would take away or really think stand out about this particular game? I have a feeling ours are going to be largely shared this time, so I'll let you go ahead and go first, and then probably we'll just embellish the discussions.
Yeah. I do want to say before I do the first one that I had played with audio a lot more the last couple sessions, and the music is amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
I just love it in every way. And when they cue certain pieces, it's amazing, and it just fits the tone. I don't know why it fits the tone. Like, I don't know why it speaks dwarf to me so much, but I think it's also a style that I like, that kind of like darker, folky kind of feel. It's a little Diablo in that way, but anyway.
Definitely the main theme in particular makes me think of the town theme in Diablo.
Yeah, totally. Like goth, kind of gothic folk, whatever, darkness. Yeah. Okay, well, the first takeaway that I'll throw out there, which is a bit snarky and silly, but it's literally the word dwarves. And what I mean by that is it's snarky and not really a takeaway, but it's a sort of a Trojan horse for a few different things, in that when you pick a theme as strong as dwarves and start making decisions and designs and building a game over 16 years around this concept, even though it's, we can reduce it down to a simulation game, and there's a lot of similarities to other simulation games, et cetera, and some of the fundamentals like happiness meters or building or workshops or whatever, those are things you find in other games. They're still so wrapped up in the concept of dwarves, right? Mining, stockpiling, trading,
trades,
drinking,
craft.
What's important to dwarves? Craft, craftspeople, masonry, building, walls and door, just like building dungeons essentially. And, taverns, et cetera, and goes on and on and on. And so, it's a little bit of a cop-outy kind of takeaway, but for me, it just is another good reminder of how pure, and again, it's such a uniquely weird development story because it's been developed the way that it was, the glyph-based aspect of it. In those days, it was like, yes, it's dwarves, but you have to like imagine more, versus the Steam version. But still, you got it. Even with the glyphs, you're like, yeah, I get it. Dwarves, and like digging into a mountain, it's about even the name Dwarf Fortress. You're like, yeah, I get it. Dwarf Fortress. Let's do this,
Yeah.
And it seems like a simple takeaway, but in a way, it's like so all encompassing on decisions that they made, So,
I mean, I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, I've said several times that their focus on that and all the things that tie into it, are what allows them to generate these kind of incredible stories that come out of their systems, and it's because they focused just on that and just went deep, as it were. You're just going to figure out everything that's part of, the life cycle of these dwarves. And that turns out to be quite a lot. And mine, I'll tie right to that, is just the amount of iteration here obviously is enormous. And I mean, it is, as we've said multiple times, it's a gift to be able to see so many of their iterations, to literally be able to start with their first release and then just like be able to plunk down in any number of spots over the last, however many years, almost 2 decades of stuff, to literally just be able to go and say, I wonder what it looked like back in 2009. You could do that. That's amazing. Yeah. And it doesn't require any fancy got to have a separate server. I mean, it being a single player game makes that a lot more possible, but also just their slow and steady building this thing, like building the perfect fortress, is something that has allowed them to also do that and kind of show where their kind of abandoned, projects were in a sense, right? I mean, each version was just like, oh, that one wasn't good enough. Let's go further. And that's just, that's really remarkable. it's one of those things where I wish I had the time, because I would honestly, genuinely love playing all of the versions just to see those iterations, as somebody who has played remakes of games that I've really enjoyed, like the Ratchet and Clank games or something like that. It is really enjoyable for me to go back and look at those and see the iterations of both like the original games and the iterations in those series when they originally came out, and then what they did with them when they remastered them or whatever. How they refined the interfaces, or how how the game felt. Like the auto equipping of the right gadget to do the right thing in places. You could see all of that happening here. We kind of fast forwarded it really fast by starting at the beginning and jumping to the end. But it's super wild to me that is all visible that way. So that is a gift, and I think that's amazing. I hope that stuff is always out there for people to look at.
Yeah. It's magical. And I think to partner with that and I guess go back and restate my dwarves snarky one a little bit more. I think what I was getting at there was sort of like, commitment to a theme and how much that drives design when you do commit to that, and then it also drives iteration too. Yeah, one of my takeaways was iteration as well, specifically around the development process. So you just covered that one pretty well. No need to hit that again, but they're, other than a still live, like we've talked offline about some potential next games. Not next games, but future games we could play that we'll be able to sort of talk about longevity in being live, in a different way.
Yeah.
But we won't have the benefit of seeing previous versions, and I just, other than a long-standing MMO or something like, which isn't even the same because the server's live unless they have, I guess, WoW Classic a little bit, because you got to go back and see the original version, but there's just there's no examples like this. We have nothing.
Yeah.
I can't, there's stuff out there we don't know about, I'm sure. But,
sure. Yeah.
But
even something like WoW Classic, they picked a version that they were going to start from, and then I think they've been moving it forward, right? They have Crusade and things like that. So it's like you could relive it, but you can't really just revisit any point that you want, right? Yeah. And there's obviously there's good reasons for that. And that's one of the great things about this being a single player game. To do WoW that way would require just another whole level of, what do you do? What do you have servers for like every version, that it could be? That's wild.
Well, and I think the unfortunate, not to sidetrack us too much, but on the WoW Classic example, I think the cynical side of that for me that I'm still a little like sad about is that the motivation for them to move forward into the future. I mean, maybe I'm too cynical, but I'm pretty sure this is what is happening, is based on business.
Yeah.
Versus, I guess I'll say archival purposes, or something, or like the idea of kind of encapsulate, a time capsule.
Right.
And I yes, it costs money to run those things, and it costs staff, and there's definitely resources. You want a return on investment in there, but still, it's like, I don't know, wasn't that the whole point? It's like, was it just to make another buck? Because the classic servers were out there and illegally out there, and that's what they're responding to. It's like, oh, people clearly want this because they're making illegal servers, so why don't we just make it legal? Well, yeah, but then you're doing this because you want to capture money from those people.
Right.
When the reason they were doing it. But in Bay 12's case, they're just like, no, we're not doing it for monetary reason. We're just giving you all the versions. It's like, it is, like you keep saying, it's a gift. It's like, no, we're not, and I guess they played the long game and eventually got to the Steam version and, are reaping the rewards of that. But yeah, it's just,
well, so, and as primarily two people, right? It's possible financially to do it, right? Yeah. So I will let off the hook, larger teams to some degree for that, because it's just, this really is pretty unique, right? I mean, it's, it is, a relatively small download because so much is generated, right? It's, there are not a lot of assets, right? It's two people who are doing all the work. There's some non-zero amount that it costs to like put those things up there for download, but it's not the sort of thing that breaks the bank at the sort of scale that they're working. So it's just possible for them to do it, but possible and doing it are not the same thing at all. And they did it, so, there's plenty of other folks out there, I think, who could have done that, who are on sort of a similar scale, and there may be others out there that I'm not aware of. But this is definitely, I don't think there's a lot that's out there like this. So, Battlecruiser 3K notwithstanding from back in the day, so yeah.
Yeah. If anyone knows any good similar stories, let us know. If you're listening.
I'd love to hear.
So my next one, and we kind of hit my third one. We hit iteration. I actually have 4, but the fourth one, I guess, then is we kind of hit it, but I'll hit it at the end. But the third one, I just kind of boiled down to it's okay to be unforgiving, and it really is encapsulated in their statement in the tutorial or wherever it is. I'm like, it's fun to fail, or however they say it.
Yeah, losing is fun.
Losing is fun, yeah. And so obviously that's kind of the core concept in many games, but I think that if I do compare this to other Sims that we've talked about, whether it be SimCity or whether it be Civ, those games still strive for a certain kind of usability to them, right? Even though they're deep and there's a lot of systems and there's a lot going on, the playability of them and the opacity of them is still, I think, appropriate for their genre. And I think with this game, they were okay, especially in the glyph version, right? Because in a way, it's like the glyph version of the game, which was the dominant version for most of its existence, is giving them permission to be opaque in a way, right? It's like, it's one of those games. It's a game where they're just using these symbols to do everything. So it's like you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. Mm-hmm. And so like migrating to the Steam version is almost this weird transition where it's like they've just changed the glyphs into artwork, but the game is still just as opaque as it was before in a way. I mean, yes, it's gotten easier and they've made it more usable. And
it's more visually parsable. Yeah.
Yeah. Different interfaces and, the added great interfaces, and they have tutorials. And so it's definitely gotten better and better and better over the years, but I'm just glad that they didn't completely take out the unforgiving nature of it and the sort of opacity of it where you're like, wow, you can mess up pretty easily, by doing just one false thing and not recover from it or what have you, like flood your, like I did, like flood my thing. And well, in that case I did recover, but there was that sense that in that example, there was that moment of where my stomach sank, where I'm like, oh man, I just ruined it, So even though I was able to recover, which I talked about earlier, I just, kind of like it's okay to have an unforgiving game in that way, because that's kind of part of the point.
Yeah. No, I agree. And yeah, it is, on the one thing that makes me want to hold it at arm's length. But it's, because the time to failure is so long often. There's a time at which you're like, well, I mean, you're giving me hope where it's like, well, maybe I could pull it out. I was like, oh no, that's the worst lesson for me to take from it. Cause it's like, my heart will just be dashed against the rocks later. But I do think it's a real strength of the game, honestly, in that you are learning so much through like trying to do a thing, having it fail, seeing what you can do to recover, learning something from that, all of that is a really pleasant loop. It's just very time consuming. And I think that's totally great and valuable. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think a big one would be, leaning into what your fidelity can give you. Like, we talked a little bit about how a higher fidelity game, in terms of visual representation means that when you want to do something in it, everything kind of has to be at the same level of fidelity. Otherwise, the world doesn't read right. So you end up being able to do less because you're doing things in higher fidelity. We have an email that we might get to this time, which talks about the behavior of cats and how that led to an interesting bug. We'll get to that part of it. But it made me think about like, okay, but what does it mean to give a cat a behavior in this game? And under the hood, right, there is some code, but really the code is, and some of this has come up with when you've seen behaviors from dwarves, like a guy enters a room and then he leaves the room. It's like that behavior can be pretty simple, but then how you actually describe it, you can actually describe the things that are making him want to leave the room. He sees the thing, right? You lean into the fact that you're going to describe what he saw, but that's just text. So it's cheap. It's like, he reacted to the blood, so he left the room, but he was tired, so he entered the room, like that dwarf you had that was kind of going back and forth with the dwarf in the corner. The same thing with a cat. It's like you can make a dozen behaviors for a cat, all of which look the same. The cat is in the same place for a little while. You can describe that as the cat found a piece of dust to play with on the floor. The cat found a place to rest in a beam of sunlight. The cat scratched his behind for a while. The cat licked behind its ears. You could just describe that 20 different ways, and all of it looks the same to the player visually, but the story the player plays, puts in their head is different, for all of those different things, right? Because they're like, oh, check out what this cat is doing. Oh, it's still got a little of a kitten in it. Of course, they are actually simulating a lot of those things so that they are actually well motivated based on, maybe that's percentages. The cat's more likely to play with some random bit of dirt, if it's younger. I don't know how they do any of these things. I don't know what this thing looks like under the hood. There's a lot of simulation depth there, but you can give it so much personality by the fact that you don't have to represent it other than as a little string of text of what's going on. And I love taking that, what you would think would be a weakness in the marketplace, like this is extremely low fidelity, visually. And that's a huge strength for them. It allows them to do so much that other games can't. And I love that they lean into that and make it a strength. So I think that's a real lesson for anyone in development,
Yeah. Yeah, totally. That totally is. I mean, it's the smoke and mirrors of it all, where perception is whatever 9/10 of the law, really.
Yeah, I'm sure that's how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what they all say. Perception is 9/10 of the law. That's what they say.
Well, obviously it bastardizes it on purpose, but yeah,
that's a good one. I like that.
I used it today for our day jobs. I was talking to somebody about. I was like, I don't care what you think is happening. Perception is 9/10 of the law. So that's what the player thinks is happening. So.
That's very good. All right. Do you have another one? I think you alluded to having another one.
No, I think we covered it. Well, it was iteration. So you hit it earlier. Yeah, it was iteration focused. So, no, I think that covers it. My fourth one kind of got gobbled up with the other ones. So.
With the other ones. Okay. Yeah. I think we've covered everything I wanted to say too. I will also echo your, compliments of the music. Actually, I think it's worth just talking about the level of procedural generation here as well, because they generate this whole world.
Of course. Yeah, that's a good one.
That's such a huge amount of work. And it is so amazing to look at all that information go by. I haven't dug around enough. There's so much, so I don't know where to find these things, but I would love to read. I don't want to read all 500,000 things that happened, but I would like to read the 500 or whatever things that they did sort of put, that happened in the window as it was generating. I would love to kind of read that. I'm very curious, but maybe that turns up in the books. It's just the way that this thing just, everything sort of ties through, and how things are named, and that everything. I don't know. It's funny because it's auto-generated lore, so it's even more throwaway for me in a sense, but it is really, really impressive that that they are able to generate all of that, but also just how the world is built and behaves, and the procedural generation of the land masses. And I mean, lots of games have had that, but here the fact that they're also generating the history of that world as they do it, and that you can see it happening. You can see the settlements popping up, and you can go and you can kind of like make choices about where you want to place your own camp, because this one's too close to some goblins. All right, I read about those goblins. They were almost wiped out by a hydra 20 years ago, but if they lived through that, they're probably pretty tough. Like, I mean, you can kind of just imagine all this stuff and just like be very careful about where you place your world. Not that I've interacted with even a percent of that world, right? I've been generating these large worlds. Now I'm really curious about generating a pocket world. Maybe that's what I should do. I have fewer threats around me or something. But I don't know. It's
it makes it less daunting. The pocket worlds make it less daunting as sort of like what the possibilities are, because it's just all right there. I mean, imagine a day, which I have to assume that they're wanting to do someday. And it's a little bit like, I'm not sure what to think of it when it comes to all this whole the AI revolution happening right now, which I'm very mixed about. But imagine a day where they have a feature, maybe it's a little bit like their movie feature, which I haven't dabbled with, but where they have a feature where you get you play the game for X amount of time, and at any point you can hit a button to export basically history books of what happened to your civilization and read it in such a manner that is readable. You know what I mean? Like, and not just a series of, and then they did this, and then they did this, but more like prose-ish, and imagine if they get to a point where you could like have a tome, and then like send it to somebody in a PDF and be like, read the story of my Dwarf Fortress, and it could be pretty compelling, right? There could be the time when, like just your bard alone, right? What are they calling it? The
Very Pouty Bard.
The Very Pouty Bard. It's like, that's the subtitle of it. It's like, and then it's just, I don't know. It could happen.
It could happen. I could see it. I mean, it's an interesting thing to try to, it's always interesting to try to find the other interesting things you can do, especially with these, with small independent games, and not that this game is small, but with independent games, small in terms of development. You think of Firewatch, which had, there was an in-game camera. Lots of games have in-game cameras, and their game was like a little, like a camera with the 24 shots of film, some of which had already been taken, like 3 or 4 or something like that had already been taken. And you can go and you can take however many shots are left on the roll in the game. Lots of games have that. But Firewatch was the only one where at the end of the game, you could go and order those photos to be printed and sent to you. Like they were developed, back in the day, and they'd be the pictures you took in the game. Those are, those things are super clever. And good differentiators too, right? I mean, it's another bite at the apple from a story standpoint, in the journalism, Oh yeah, hey, this game lets you do this. I mean, like, not only does Dwarf Fortress give you a history of an invented world, but you can print it. It's like, it's a good selling point and a good story to write, for somebody someday. So we shall see. We shall see if they end up there. Well, we are already well over time, but we have so much email. I feel like we should at least tackle a couple quick ones. So actually, we will do the 2 that you have. So I will do the second one. You can do the first one. I, of course, have them all here. These were sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. We are still calling the shots, as it were. I gave you another one of those, which has a question. So I guess we'll be addressing that a little bit. Why don't you go ahead and hit that?
Okay, more from Calling the Shots. Episode 148 to 151, Kingdom Hearts. Oh, I remember those days. I recall having similar struggles with the gameplay mechanics. It took a long time to beat this game, and I was drawn to the Disney environment more than anything. Kingdom Hearts 2 seemed to be the perfection of the art form in terms of gameplay. I loved it so much more, and I can still visualize Sora flying through the air doing crazy combos while wielding twin keyblades. Kingdom Hearts 3 kind of seemed like a bit of a letdown in comparison. However, when the Final Fantasy 7 remake came out, I realized how good a slightly more grounded version of these mechanics could be. Here's the question, I think. Do you know of any other examples of one game introducing a mechanic or fighting style that was perfected by a different game series? And yes, that's from Colin.
That's from Colin.
The Shots.
Colin the Shots. Colin the Shots, James Tiberius Togus. Or Tugus? We're not really sure. If that is his real name. I remember when we played Super Mario 64 that we talked about the 3D camera and the 3D platforming, and I already can't remember the name of the PlayStation 1 game that preceded it that was the first true one to solve those problems. It was like Jumping Flash or something like that, something along those lines. And yeah, who knows? So it's often the ones that the game that makes the mechanic feel right, or that game wasn't perfect either, but it was way further along than anybody else was as far as figuring out those mechanics. I honestly feel like Halo is that way for first-person shooters on console, because other first-person shooters on console before there were just not nearly as usable.
GoldenEye, I mean, still a good game, but it hadn't cracked the nut fully yet.
Yeah. So those are a couple that come to mind off the top of my head. I don't know if you know of any.
Well, sorry, hold on. My earpiece fell out. I'm coming back. I'm back. Okay.
Back.
Yeah, this is a low hanging fruit, easy one for me, and I come back to it time and time again. And to your point on we had a round table at some point when I was at Crystal where we talked about this. We were kicking off things for the reboot and stuff, and we were trying to talk about, it's a whole nerdy conversation, but we're talking about innovation basically. And one of the conclusions that we came to, which you just uttered there, of innovation is often the credit of innovation is often given to the one that did it the best, not the first one to do it. And so the example that I always use for this is Kill Switch versus Gears of War. Gears of War has always gotten the credit for being the first to really have the perfected cover-based sticky target shooting, the cover-based combat, third-person combat. But Kill Switch was a game that probably very few people know of. I think it was called Kill Switch, that actually did it first, technically, I believe. And I think Cliff Blazinski actually gives them credit for that. But if you think about cover-based shooting, everyone thinks of Gears.
Of course.
They're the ones that really perfected it. So it's not I guess he says mechanic or fighting style. So I think that applies.
Yeah, we're not good on fighting styles. But one thing I can, say to that is that, good artists copy, great artists steal. And when they say that, they don't mean they literally steal it. What they mean is that they do that thing that you've done so well that they become associated with it, right? Yeah. Is that they've done it, they've just taken it to exactly what it needed to be to just land itself in the firmament, and I think that's sort of what we're talking about with those examples for sure. I'm sure there are others along those lines, but that's a good position to be in, to see something and think, oh man, this is, if we just match this idea with this other, it's just not set in the right place. Like taking that earlier PlayStation 1 third person platformer, or a 3D platformer rather, and then taking it and putting it in Mario was like the perfect marriage, and for a lot of reasons. And their character was very abstract. Darren even talked about this, where they had a first person shooter game, but it was like an abstract Pac-Man like character, in a maze, right? And it just was like, yep. And then they did Doom, and it was like, he had something like Doom before Doom, and it just didn't, wasn't the right thing. Not that Doom was taking from them in any way, because I'm sure they hadn't seen that game. But yeah, I mean, it's just there's also a zeitgeist that sort of happens as well. Everything kind of gets to the point where now it's possible to do these things, or people think of these things because they have the same inputs, and they're like, oh, you know what? Why don't we try to take the platformer into 3D? Why don't we try to, make a cool cover mechanic? We can do the math on the physics well enough, or tag the environment in the right way, or whatever. We have enough animation, fidelity and enough memory for it, to do additional animations for that, or whatever, whatever it is that is the sort of zeitgeist that leads to those innovations is a big part of it. So I will do this second email. We will continue with more calling the shots in the future. This subject is a cat walks into a bar, ... And it is from Gothic Chocobo. Hey, Goth. Hey, Brett and Tim. Hearing Tim talk about the problems he keeps on having with cats reminded me of the bug report of dead cats in taverns. For those that are not aware, there was a bug report that was submitted for Dwarf Fortress detailing that a player kept on finding dead cats in the tavern, and they couldn't figure out why. It turns out that if a dwarf was called out to do something while drinking, it would just drop the drink on the floor. When a cat then walked into the bar, it would walk through the spilt alcohol, and because of something they had added to make lava more realistic, the alcohol would get onto the cat's paws. The cats would then clean their paws. This was put in when they coated in eyelids to self-clean blood that splattered into characters' eyes, and because of a numerical error, the game thought that the cat was drinking an entire mug of alcohol when they cleaned their paws. Needless to say, this resulted in the cats dying from alcohol poisoning. I thought I heard it originally on a podcast, but I can't find it at the moment. And he has a link here of Tarn Adams talking about it at the start of his no-clip interview. And he has the link, and I'll put that in the show notes. Nice to hear from you, Goth, and that is a good story. I had actually heard that one myself back in the day at some point. That I do remember on maybe there might have been a account or something that I would occasionally see on Twitter or something like that with the weird Dwarf Fortress bugs. It was just like a bot that just put the Dwarf Fortress bugs in every so often, and people would retweet them because they were so weird. But that's a good one. That is an example of the depth. That is what I was alluding to earlier, of the sort of complexity and what you can do with just a cat. And how easy it is. But yeah, they are obviously simulating these things. But they can describe them. The cat licks its paws. It's just wild to me.
Yeah, and the connection to the lava, and then like the blood in the eyes, and it's just like all the different variables to get to that point. So
yeah. Oh, we had a fluid simulation, and we had to keep track. We wanted to eat away at the soles of dwarves' feet if they walked through some thin lava on the ground. Because they were trying to get away. I mean, you see the chain of events that led to this bug because of the level of simulation they did. It's pretty funny. It's pretty good stuff. Thanks, Goth. Nice to hear from you. All right, so we'll do more of those next week. In fact, next week I'll have to look and see if we have enough to do just a whole mailbag, because I think we have quite a few here. Oh yeah, we do. We have quite a few emails.
Yeah, that's true. We haven't done one of those.
I haven't done one of those. We might have to catch up a little bit. So now's your chance. Send in more emails, and tip me over the scales where I'm like, I got to do one now. So those were sent, of course, to devgameclub@gmail.com. Thanks so much. We also love to get your reviews. I catch them all if they're on the Apple, whatever infrastructure. But, if you use some other thing, Podcast Addict or Spotify or even Overcast or something else, and we don't see it or read it, go ahead and shoot us an email. Tell us where to find it. And we'd love to read those things online as well. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also occasionally find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
You have taken quite a number of weeks off of twitching because of various pressures, but one of these days you're going to get back to it. And what are you doing on there right now? I've lost track at this point.
Well, I was playing Dark Souls 2, and I will continue playing Dark Souls 2, but I think I mentioned in a previous episode, I'm considering, just because I haven't streamed in so long, that I might clean slate a little bit and go back to my promise of finishing some of the games for the podcast that I haven't finished, like maybe Far Cry 2 or maybe Dead Space.
Okay.
Just kind of like, palate cleansing. And then I will get back to Dark Souls 2, but picking that back up after many hours, it's like,
Well, yep. It's a thing. Well, anyway, that's at twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers, and our logo, our merch store, and our Discord is by Mark Garcia, although that last one with some help from others. You can find links to all that stuff by going to our Twitter page, looking at the pinned one, and I think I have links for all that stuff. If not, just shoot me an email or a DM on there. Have fun turning the frown upside down on your own Very Pouty Bard this week, and good night.
Good night.